So we're going to be talking about the battle for your mind, and it's actually every day, and there's a lot to it. And so I'm going to probably be about, shoot for like 15 minutes. It could probably be like a 1 hour sermon, really, but I'm not going to be able to cover everything, all within 15 to 20 minutes. But I do have a lot highlighted and stuff that really stood out to me. So before we begin, I'd like to start with a word of prayer. Father, we thank you so much that we could all be here this morning, and I thank you for the opportunity that we have to preach today. I ask that my words would be your words, and that we would take what we've learned from today and be able to apply it to our lives, and always be ready for the cultural battle that is against our mind every day. So, having two sons, I find it more and more difficult to have some quiet time to be able to think on top of doing everything I do on a daily basis, as a lot of you guys know. But I did have some time alone in the car when I was driving over to my other job in Indiana. And a thought occurred to me, and it was, how original are your thoughts? And I mean, when I really do truly say that seriously, in the regards of what have you done on your own accord without the influence of something else? Because everything that we do, we have to react. And I was talking to my wife, and I was like, I don't want to make it sound funny when I say it, but even to go as far as from when you were first born and crying, I mean, that's one of the most original things you've probably ever done, because we're always learning and taking in information and we're reacting on it. And so basically some ways that your thoughts could be influenced would be something like a quote. So a quote is something that's very easy to remember. Typically, it's pretty impactful, and you'll take it to heart. And a lot of times I'll hear people reference a quote for something, and they're like, yeah, I believe this, and this is something that's really good. Like, okay, that's a good thing. We reference information from other sources a lot. So, whether we read books or watch sermons or, watch television, whatever it may be, going to school, something like that, we're taking a lot of that in, and we're putting it into our hearts and minds. We listen to other people's stories. Those stories can be impactful, and they can change your life if you observe what their outcomes were, and they may have warnings or give you information like, hey, when I was your age, I did this stuff, and it didn't turn out so great. Or, I was this old, and I did this thing, and I would encourage you to do that. So another thing, too, this year, a lot of stuff was pretty political, and a lot of different world events going on right now, and especially in the United States. There were things that I would have never thought to have talked about to people, or I very rarely talk to people about. But as a good instance of cultural influence, we end up talking about a lot of different things. There were even some situations that I had where I noticed that even the people of my youth normally wouldn't talk about certain things, but they brought it up because of the cultural influence. And they typically took a side, and if you weren't on that side, you were, put to the corner or shoved to the side, and you were looked down upon. I think that's a pretty common thing that happens, especially with social media. It's very easy. Like, for instance, a lot of people didn't really talk about abortion. Every once in a while, I'll come across somebody that's always like, we went out to this rally today, or we stood outside of that abortion clinic and we tried to minister to people, things of that nature. What I saw happening probably 6 months ago, there was a small trend going on for abortion on social media. A lot of people were shaming people, like, you shouldn't be going out and talking to these people. You don't know their situational circumstances, things like that. But we're trying to protect life because we know that each life is precious and made in God's image. And so kind of my point being is that we're always pulling in information, and we're having to respond to various events that happen in our lives. And with some of those examples, it wasn't necessarily meant to be a bad thing, because, we always pick up good things from sermons and people that we are with, and it was just more to get you guys thinking, right? Because it's really important. And so what we put into our hearts and minds is important, and it's going to show and manifest throughout our life with the decisions that we make and the things that we do. I have a few verses that talk about the result of negative influences on our lives. And so I'd like to start out with Ecclesiastes 10:2-3. And it says this: "A wise person's heart directs him toward the right, but the foolish person's heart directs him toward the left. Even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking, and he demonstrates to everyone that he's a fool." And then in Proverbs, I picked out a couple from there as well. And in Proverbs 13:20, it says this: "But he who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm." In Proverbs 22, verse 24-25, it says, "Do not associate with a man given to anger, or go with a hot-tempered man, or you will learn his ways and find a snare for yourself." And in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, it says this: "Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. Become sober-minded as you ought, and stop sinning, for some have no knowledge of God. And I speak this to you in your shame." That one I find to be a very powerful statement, in that bad company corrupts good morals, and that is something that I take to heart every day. It's something that I look out for when I speak to people or choose my friends. And I say that because it's important to try to avoid stumbling blocks in our lives, like the people that we associate ourselves with or talk to on a daily basis that can make a very big impact on the things that we do. And, we live in a real world, and we encounter various worldviews. Right, there we go. So, for example, some of the average trends of the world, right? And it's not to say that we're going to group all these thoughts in the average person's mind, but they're, through different things, we hear different ideologies and things that the world generally approves of. So one of those common things I hear a lot of people say is follow your heart. Do what you think is right. If it feels good, go ahead and do it. But we already know that we don't want to necessarily do that because the heart can be deceitfully wicked. And we know that sometimes we can make excuses for things or try to justify the way that we do things, but really we need to look at what the Lord has to say about what we do. And, another one would be an example of marriage. A lot of people now that I talk to aren't really interested in marriage anymore. And even the statistical divorce rate has increased over time, and it still does today. And it's typically frowned upon with a lot of people that I talk to. Also in the same in the same area, we have children. A lot of times children are now looked at almost as a curse rather than a blessing, because they are a burden to a degree, in a sense that you have to be selfless, you have to take your time, you have to love them, nurture them, and provide a lot of different things that otherwise you wouldn't normally have to do, so you have to make sacrifices for that. Also, abortion, and abortion being a choice, is also being pushed quite a lot lately. It's being constantly pushed all the time, even with our own governor, Governor Pritzker. He signed an executive order in 2019 for abortions and said that we're becoming a more progressive state and that we're going to be one of the most progressive states. Gender, that's been a big topic right now. Otherwise, it normally would not have been talked about. And the fact that it's acceptable to do what you want with your body. It doesn't matter what you are and how you're biologically born and how God's designed you, but now it's being looked at as, well, you can be whatever you want. You can choose, right? And so they're pushing this so hard that I was reading an article from the Illinois Family Institute the other day about how back in 2019, Governor Pritzker was going to sign an executive order in order to indoctrinate our schools. And I kind of thought, man, that's really weird. Like, why are they pushing this so hard? Why are they trying to put this on school children, right? I mean, they're doing things like they were going to create a trans task force. And they're going to put these people in these government institutions that are teaching our children. Some of the recommendations in 2020 were to allow students to use the bathroom that they identified themselves with, to give faculty training for this type of ideology, so basically to indoctrinate those people as well and to force them to teach this, allowing boys to participate in girls' sports, and among that there were other things in there as well. So quite a lot of focus on pushing this in our schools. But again, the battle for your mind is that important, that they're trying to go for the youth of our children. And that once they have that, they don't need to push anymore because they've already trained them successfully. Because it's going to be a lot harder to train somebody who's already learned their ways in life and know, what their morals are and what they believe, but children are young and impressionable. And it's just that simple. And we're putting them all in these institutions, right? Not all of us, but a lot. So a lot of these ideas are spread by the people of our culture, and it's done through social media, and they're put on a pedestal, and they're given the perfect platform to push these things on all of us, really, in various ways. They say what they wish, and it's put on our TVs. When I turn the TV on anymore, half the time, I don't have cable anymore, but I still have other subscriptions to various things. And for myself, I don't worry about myself as much, but even my sons, and it's like, what am I going to do to put, what do I watch? Like, what do I let them do? And then I do have to be careful with myself because I can become more desensitized to various things that are put on TV, right? It's on the radio. I can't turn the radio on anymore without hearing something about COVID-19 or some other random thing half the time. And also on our cell phones. That's probably the biggest influencer, in my opinion. Because that's where we pull a lot of our information from every day. You're only going to see what people are going to put on your screen. So I get a lot of times people, oh my gosh, people are doing this and that, but then you step outside of the state for a minute and you're like, wait a minute. People are doing things a different way and we didn't even know it the whole time. So it's kind of a weird, localized thing that I'm starting to see just traveling out of different states. But again, what the perception of your reality is based off of what's being shown on your phone. So even elected politicians are constantly pushing new legislation all the time, and they're promoting evil ideas. They're being elected by the people of the United States, and the problem is that our generation is slowly falling away from Christ, and we're going to see these things pushed more and more. And we know that these things are not good that I just mentioned, right? But it can still creep up on us, and because there's so much of it, there's a way that it kind of just makes its way subtly into our lives. And not to say that we're going to be on one side of the wrong side, but it can affect us, and it can even desensitize us to those things around us, right? And so now that I've kind of gone over some of those examples, I guess the question would be, what are we going to do to guard our mind from a lot of these different influences in our life? How can we as Christians protect our worldview and watch it and be ready for when those things come? And we'll look at Ephesians 6:10 through 20, and that's talking about the full armor of God. And finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against the flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything to stand, stand firm. With the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted in the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people. Pray for me also, that whenever I speak, words may be given to me so that I will fearlessly be made known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains. Pray that I may declare it fearlessly as I should. So basically, I'd say in summary that would be alert, be ready, and observe the world around you, because the devil's schemes are out there, and they can trip us up at any given time. And I find it fascinating because it just is everywhere. And it's always knocking on the door, ready to creep in. And so with that, we want to keep in mind to make sure that we're putting on the full armor of God every day and to be ready. And in Romans 10, verse 2, we're told, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed in the renewal of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. So we want to fill our minds with the word of the Lord, because it's good for the soul. It'll give you discernment for the things that are coming in your way every day. You'll be more acute to what's really going on, and when you're ready and well-versed, you're not going to fear. You'll be filled with wisdom to truly see as God sees. When we're continually renewing our mind, it's going to challenge our worldview every day if we read every day. It's going to challenge our worldview. It's going to make us question various things that we encounter, and it's going to make us check ourselves. We know that, the world is in chaos right now, but at least when we read the word of the Lord, we know that he's in control, and we know that he'll give us the wisdom we need to react. And it's funny, too, one of the most challenging things I hear from Christians typically is that they have trouble reading their Bible. And whether it's, once a week or once a day, a lot of times, it's just like, man, Jake, I read my Bible last night, but I didn't bother reading it to my family. Or, I really need to get that out, and I just need to start reading it. But it's funny, because our flesh naturally pushes that back. And really, too, Satan's going to do what he can to keep us from reading, because it is just that important. And even if he could try it, even if we just read one verse a day, that's still something rather than nothing, and you're feeding yourself the Word of God. So I'd encourage you guys, even if you're having trouble, because some of us do, even I do sometimes, even just to read one verse a day is still something to get you on the track, to get you started. Even if it's just like been home from work and it's been a 12-hour day, it's like, hey, what's the verse of the day on the Bible app today? And just read it, just to have something. Because you're still making a conscious effort to get in there and to start making that a habit. We can also pray for understanding and wisdom. God can renew your minds just by simply asking for it, because just as he gave Solomon wisdom, he can give us wisdom as well. And I can assure you that back in my days of just being in college and things like that, I was praying all the time, like, God, please make me sharp, and please don't let me go in that direction, or, give me the wisdom I need in order to discern what's right or wrong, because that was probably the most trying time so far in my lifetime, that I've had to deal with a lot of those outside influences. Another thing that we can do is we can fellowship with one another. And just like we have our fellowship Sunday every end of the month, I think that's great, because we're going, as we're going throughout our month and our weeks, we can pick up on habits and mannerisms of people. And what better way to do that than to spend time with one another in fellowship and to build one another up and encourage each other. And, that's awesome. And even in Proverbs 27:17, it says this: as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 23 through 25, it says this: hold firmly the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let's consider how to encourage one another in love and good deeds, not abandoning our own meetings together, as it is the habit of some people, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. So just remember when we see each other every Sunday or visit with each other in our homes and for fellowship, that we want to encourage each other. We want to love one another. And again, you can be that good influence for somebody, and you can even grow yourself by talking to someone else. And so for my conclusion and summary is basically to be aware that every day there's a battle for your mind, and to know that there are many outside influences that are going to come knocking on your door every day, and that we got to make sure we put the full armor of God on and be ready for that, and that we are in the world, but we're not of the world. And even by doing all these things, you never know how you could impact someone else's life. People will observe you and see how you are and what your countenance is. Are you happy? What is that spark that someone sees in you? Are you excited to talk about the Lord? What are we doing to further his kingdom in our walk every day? And so with that too, keep in mind, how are our thoughts being consumed? What is it that we're putting our time on? Because again, when we're immersed in our culture every single day, it's easy to sit there, like at my work, it's easy to sit there and talk about the coronavirus for a whole solid hour, and that coronavirus, now we're in lockdown again, or this was the death count for this week, or all of these different things. But realizing, oh, wait a minute, we can focus on some of that, because obviously we have to, but got to make sure that I'm making time for the Lord. Got to make sure that I'm meditating on his good teachings every day, if I can help it. And so just remember all that as you go through your daily walk in life as a Christian.